Hola y bienvenido a Learn Spanish en SpanishDict.com. Soy Perly Whitmire y soy tu profesora. Hoy aprenderás más del pretérito y unos verbos muy útiles de los viajes como vinieron por coche, dije un cuento fantástico y mucho más. ¡Vámonos! Bueno, has estudiado mucho del pretérito, pero hay más. You have learned the regular preterite and the irregular preterite. Now I have to tell you a bit about a few other verbs that can be a little tricky in the preterite. The first of these are what I call kind of irregular verbs. These verbs are not classified as irregular because they still bear some resemblance to the original, but change one or two letters in the preterite tense. Many also have a stem change and a spelling change. We've got a lot to cover, so we should get started. First, we're going to use the irregular preterite endings I talked about in the last lesson, same as the ER, IR preterite endings, but without the tildes and without the letter I in the third person singular. Iste, o, imos, istes, and ieron. No tildes and therefore no stress on the last syllable when you pronounce the entire word. I like to group these kind of irregulars into a few different groups by the letter that they use in the stem in the preterite. There may be additional stem or spelling changes within the categories, but you can still group the verbs together with at least one common letter, and that really helps me remember which verbs are kind of irregular. There are four main categories for this kind of irregular in the preterite. I, you, J, and UV, or I, U, J, I, V. Let's start with the change to an I, like hacer, to make or do, querer, to want, and venir, to arrive. These three verbs will use an I instead of the main vowel in the infinitive. Por ejemplo, in venir, you will take off the infinitive ending, the IR, then replace the main vowel in the stem, the E, with an I. The same works for hacer and querer. Take off the infinitive ending so that you have has and quer. Has will change to is and quer will change to quis, changing the vowel and the following consonant. Just something extra for this irregular verb. Another note about hacer is that it will also have a small spelling change in the third person singular. Instead of H-I-C-O, which if you read it aloud would sound something like I-co, which doesn't sound like the other conjugations. So that C changes to a Z to maintain that S sound. Hizo. Manuel hizo su tarea. Manuel did his homework. Why don't you try a few? We'll practice with venir, which just has the E to I stem change. Remember to use your irregular preterite endings without the tildes. I'll give you the subject and the infinitive in parentheses. You conjugate the verb into the preterite tense and read the whole sentence aloud. El sujeto es ellos y el infinitivo es venir. Vinieron por coche. They arrived by car. El sujeto es yo y el infinitivo es venir. Vine a las 9 anoche. I arrived at 9 o'clock last night. El sujeto es nosotros y el infinitivo es venir. Vinimos tarde a la fiesta. We arrived late to the party. Bien, 3 categorías más. Continuamos con la letra U. Los verbos de esta categoría son caber, to fit or to be possible, haber, to have, used in compound tenses and for expressing existence, poder, to be able to, poner, to put, y saber, to know. For these verbs, you use the letter U in the stem instead of the main vowel. There may also be a few spelling changes after the vowel change, so keep an eye out for those too. Por ejemplo, con el verbo poner, which you know from poner la mesa, to set the table. But in most cases, poner means to put, like, se puso los guantes. He put on the gloves. The O in the original stem, pon, changed to a U, and the N changed to an S as well. You remember reflexive verbs, right? The reflexive pronouns don't change in a different tense, so you don't have to worry about that. But talking about what you did to get ready this morning is a very easy way to practice both your reflexive pronouns and your preterite. Let's look at poner without the reflexive pronoun. Puse el cilantro en el plato. Pusiste el cilantro en el plato. How would you conjugate poner to say she put the cilantro on the plate? Puso el cilantro en el plato. Bien, ahora pasamos a la tercera categoría, la J. Los verbos de esta categoría son conducir, to drive, decir, to say or to tell, traducir, to translate, y traer, to bring or to carry. Para estos verbos se usa la letra J. Conducir and traducir conjugate the same way, replacing the C with a J, then adding the preterite endings. Conduje el autobús en Irlanda. I drove the bus in Ireland. Condujiste el autobús en Marruecos. You drove the bus in Morocco. See the pattern? How would you conjugate conducir to say he drove a bus in Scotland if Escocia is Scotland? Condujo el autobús en Escocia. He drove the bus in Scotland. Now, it's pretty impossible to find a picture that accurately portrays traducir, to translate, but let's take a look at the plural conjugations. They work just like conducir. Tradujimos, tradujisteis, tradujeron. Something to notice here is that instead of the ieron that you would expect for the third person plural, you're just going to use eron, since the last letter of the stem is a J. The same thing will happen with conducir in the third person plural. Condujeron, not condujieron. Decir is very similar in that the C changes to a J, but for this one, the E also changes to an I. Dije un cuento fantástico. I told a fantastic story. Dijimos la verdad. We told the truth. Traer works like a regular, irregular verb after you take off the ER and add the J. Traje, trajiste, trajo, etc. Not so bad, right? It's just a matter of organizing your verbs in your mind and knowing the general stem change patterns. Just one more to go. Los verbos de esta categoría son tres. Andar, to walk, estar, to be, y tener, to have. For these verbs, you're going to change the spelling to include a UV. Of course, there can be other spelling changes as well. But let's look at andar. Take off the AR infinitive ending and you have AND. Then you add UV. You're not going to replace anything on this one. And then you add the irregular preterite endings. Anduve en el Parque del Buen Retiro ayer. I walked in Buen Retiro Park yesterday. Anduvo al restaurante a las 8. She walked to the restaurant at 8 o'clock. How about you walked in the park? How would you conjugate andar to say you walked? Anduviste en el parque. Perfecto. You conjugate estar the same way. Take off the AR, add UV, then the irregular preterite endings. Estuve, estuviste, estuvo, etc. Now, tener can be a little bit different. For tener, you not only remove the infinitive ending, but also the next two letters, E and N. So your preterite stem for tener is just the letter T. Then you add the UV and then the irregular preterite endings. Tuve, tuviste, tuvo, etc. Vale, es todo para los casi irregulares. There are, however, a few spelling and stem changers, but they are super easy compared to the stuff that we just went over. All the spelling changes are there simply to preserve the original pronunciation. And they use the endings you would expect them to use. AR verbs will use AR preterite endings, and ER and IR verbs will use ER and IR endings with the tildes, like jugar, to play, tocar, to touch, and cruzar, to cross. All of these verbs need to maintain their consonant sounds, the g, k, and s sounds. But in the preterite conjugations, in the yo form, the ending is going to be an E, and these pronunciations change when followed by an E. A G followed by an E or an I will make an H sound. A C followed by an E or an I will make an S sound, just like in English. And in Spanish, whenever a Z is followed by an E or an I, it changes to a Z sound instead of its regular S sound. For example, if we conjugated jugar without adding anything, you would have J-U-G-E in the yo form. This would be juge, which doesn't sound like anything I know of in Spanish. So to maintain that G sound, you're going to add a U. Jugué al fútbol esta tarde. I played soccer this afternoon. Any verb that ends in gar is going to act this way. Add a U before the E, but only in the yo form. Another gar verb is pagar, to pay. What is the first person singular conjugation of pagar in the preterite following this rule? Pagué. Muy bien. Now, for CAR verbs like tocar, you're going to change that C to a QU in the first person singular. Toqué el agua en la fuente. I touched the water in the fountain. Another CAR verb is buscar, to look for. What is the first person singular conjugation of buscar? Busqué. The last category of this spelling change is going to be ZAR verbs like cruzar. Crucé la calle para ir al museo. You're going to change that Z in the first person singular to a C to maintain that S sound. Another ZAR verb is memorizar. What is the first person singular conjugation of memorizar in el pretérito? Memoricé. Qué bien. Ahora, the last topic for the day, stem changers. AR and ER verbs that have a stem change in the simple present, like tener, which has an E to IE change in the boot, do not carry the stem change into the preterite. This isn't to mean that they don't have some other change in their preterite, but it's just good to know that you only have to remember one change for each verb. Just find the stem by taking off the infinitive endings, and then add your regular preterite endings. Stem changing IR verbs, however, E to IE, E to I, and O to U in the present tense keep that E or O of the infinitive in preterite conjugations, meaning they do not take a stem change, except for third person singular and plural, where they change E to I and O to U in the third person. Por ejemplo, sentir means to feel, and in the simple present has an E to IE stem change. In the preterite, you're just going to use the regular stem, SENT, for first and second person singular and plural. But in the third person singular and plural, you're going to have an E to I stem change. Sintió and sintieron. Dormir, you know, means to sleep. And in the first and second person singular and plural, you'll have DORM as your stem. But in the third person, that O is going to change to a U. Durmió and durmieron. Vale. Aprendiste un montón hoy. You learned a lot today. I recommend maybe watching this video again to thoroughly prepare yourself for the practice section at SpanishDict.com/learn, where it can be a little bit tricky since it's all, well, tricky verbs. If you don't have time now, download the video cast from iTunes and watch the lesson on the go. For a nice written explanation of everything I just went over, check out the verb reference on the Preterite at SpanishDict.com/reference to find a great study guide. Until next time, hasta luego y nos vemos!